What's happening, everybody? Trey here, joined again by my dad Sean, and today on Reactions to the Classics, we're going to be taking a look at some early Bob Dylan, his second studio album, the Freewheelin Bob Dylan, considered to be a folk masterpiece.
Yes.
We've done his rock trilogy in the middle of the 60s, and so it was nice to go back. I hadn't heard any of these songs, even though they're some of his most famous tracks on here. If this is your first time joining us at the channel, we appreciate you stopping by here at Reactions to the Classics. We take a look back at some of the most classic albums of all time and do a detailed track-by-track review of them, and just like today, it's usually the first time we've heard the record in full, so if that sounds like something interesting to you, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button, and we also have a link to our Facebook group and a Patreon for exclusive videos down below if you want to check that out. But let's just dive right into the quick facts.
You already mentioned second studio album released in May of 1963, went to #1 in the UK, 22 in the US. The US is lagging behind on a lot of these artists in the 60s. Number 97 on the Rolling Stones top 500 albums of all time. Now his self-titled debut, Trey, only had 2 original songs. This one, 11 of the 13 songs he wrote. So this is kind of the arrival of the Dylan that he would become,
Yeah.
but boy, he arrived in big fashion because these were not starter songs by any means.
No, so lyrically dense and so much deep, hard-hitting meaning, especially for the time he was writing.
Yeah, definitely.
In the early 60s in America. And his first record came out and barely sold 5,000 copies. Wasn't a hit with the critics or the public.
Susie Rotolo was the woman on the cover with him. He dated Susie for a while. She ends up leaving, going to Italy to study abroad. He writes her these letters, wants her to come back, and many of these songs kind of have an undertone. The love part of the album has an undertone of Susie in it.
And we're going to start this record off with an absolute masterpiece, Blowin' in the Wind. Rolling Stones actually has this ranked 14th on the top songs of all time. And here it really asks a bunch of rhetorical questions about race and war, peace, and the refrain, "The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind," kind of underlies the entire track. And there's 2 ways you can interpret that phrase. Either the answer is right in your face, it's hitting you, blowing in the wind right at you, or it's a little bit ambiguous, hard to kind of grasp. It's blowing in the wind, just going everywhere in each direction. So one of the masterful things that Dylan does is he's able to write lyrics that you can interpret in multiple different meanings, and he causes you to think, and boy, this track makes you think.
It really does. It's a simple musical track. There's nothing fancy about it, which is what you love about Bob, because he sucks you in through the lyrics. You're always waiting for what's coming next. I don't need somebody with $1 million voice or $1 million backing band. I just need you to suck me in, and he does it on every single song. For me, one of my absolute favorites on this album. We're going to get to another one that's a favorite on this album, Girl from the North Country.
And this has one of his sweetest vocal performances, one of his best vocal performances, I think, and is, from what we've heard so far from him.
I agree, and the Girl from the North Country is either Susie, who I think it probably is, or a high school girlfriend back in Hibbing, Minnesota, so no one really knows, and that's what you mentioned earlier. Like, Bob doesn't really give you a whole lot of info on his song.
And this really just struck me because coming after Blowin' in the Wind, you don't know what to expect, so we take it down a little bit to a more love song type of track, and honestly, this is one of my 3 favorite songs.
Mine too.
On the entire record. I was blown away by it, no pun intended, and just the sweet musical backing along with his great lyrics.
It takes us to a song that has a lot of jabs in it, Trey.
Oh, man.
Masters of War. Later on, he said it wasn't an anti-war as much as it was a pacifist song.
It's his most scathing track I've heard
Agreed.
to date. The melody is more impending doom. Something's going to happen.
The guitar sets the tone. Just kind of,
we went from the sweet Girl in the North Country to
what a
this,
difference.
And just night and day. He just has some crazy lines like, "Even Jesus wouldn't forgive you." And essentially he's talking about how the masters of war hand these guns to these young kids, but when the bullets start flying, the masters at war, they're running the other way as the blood goes through the veins of these kids down into the mud as they're dying. And at the end, Bob just brings it on home and says that he's going to stand over their grave, make sure these masters of war are dead. This just, boom, this hit me like a truck. What a way to start the album with 3 just fire
Oh, I
songs.
agree. And he also talks about towards the end, the rich man, all your money can't buy you your salvation. It's unbelievable. He says, you're trying to convince me that anybody wins a war. I just thought it was an incredibly powerful track. Next up's Down the Highway. It's a 12-bar blues style. I had never heard Dylan do blues before. The guitar is very powerful, and this kind of drives the track. For me, it's fine. Nothing wrong with it. Every track on here is good. This is one of my least favorite, but that's not saying anything bad about it.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think the notable thing about this one is we go from the heaviness of Masters of War, then we get a more, I guess, laid back.
Yeah, I guess you kind of had to do that.
Laid back type of track, and then that takes us into Bob Dylan's blues itself. And here it's kind of funny because he starts off with a spoken word saying that talking about the folk scene. He has some satire here. Dylan in the sleeve notes described it as a really off the cuff songs. He starts with an idea, then I feel what follows. Kind of like I'm walking down a side street, you gaze, and then you look in.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed this one, and again, kind of has a little bit of a lighter type of tone to it at different points. And he's very good, you'll notice, at using different types of accents.
Yeah, I liked it as well. It's fine for what it is. I think we had to have a couple song buffer between Masters of War and the next song, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall is based a little bit on a British tune, Lord Randall. He wrote this when he was 21. He recorded it in a single take. It's one of his most powerful songs I've ever heard, which is really saying something.
Oh, I totally agree. There's a lot of deep meaning. There's 5 verses, and starts off singing again, he has a softer tone in his voice.
The guitar's nice on this too.
Yeah, he talks about what did you hear? My blue-eyed son. And then he says, what did you see? My blue-eyed son. And then the sun goes down and says all that he's seen. There's people whispering, nobody hearing. I think pointing back, you got to remember this was written in the civil rights period, maybe the people that are on the outside kind of society. They are crying out, but the people at the top or just go on maybe about their day and don't really hear them. And it just continues to progress. And the last verse is very powerful. He pretty much asks his son, well, what are you going to do? And the son says, I'm going to go out before it's going to start raining. Essentially, I think he's going to kind of armor up and get ready for whatever impending thing is going to happen. He's going to face the day. He's going to stand on the ocean before it starts sinking. He's going to know his song before he starts singing. I love those lines.
That's the very last part of the song, which is tremendous, which there's so much packed lyrically. This is another one I definitely invite you to go read the lyrics. One of my absolute favorites on. So powerful. A long song as well, over 6 minutes long.
Start the B-side with another just fantastic tune. Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. Pretty much one of the best breakup songs I think I've ever heard, and it's at times sarcastic, yet also a little bit sincere.
Yeah, because he's telling her all these things, don't look, I'll already be gone, and I won't tell you goodbye, I'll tell you fairly well.
Yeah.
But then in part of the song he goes, I wish you try to convince me to stay or come back. So yeah, very interesting. Probably written to Susie. One of my favorite songs on here, maybe my favorite. Not the best lyrically or vocally, just one of those songs that you hear and go, wow.
Yeah, he's kind of telling her, hey, it's fine that we're leaving, but then he'll throw in jabs at that, like, man, you just wasted my time. At the end of the day, I gave you my heart, but you wanted my soul.
Trey, we had Bob Dylan's Blues at song number 5. Now at song number 8, we have Bob Dylan's Dream. Blues was kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Dream is a much more serious song. I love this song. The more I listen to it, the more I like it. He's basically taking you on a journey. He fell asleep. He remembered a time when he was back with his friends when he was younger. Not that Bob's old at this time, but a much simpler time. Very end of it, he said he'd basically do anything to have this time back. He'd give $10,000, which is a lot of money now, but back then it was a ton of money just to have those times back again. We thought we'd be together forever, but our roads have split. He basically tells you in one of the verses he's never seen those guys again.
No, this song really grew on me. The first couple times I heard it, I didn't really dive deep into it, and then when I really listened along as the lyrics were up, this one was one of my favorites. I was like, man, this has a very nostalgic
Yeah, and I think the older you are, like me, you're going to really go back and go, wow.
And, just I'm kind of at that point in my life. I'm about to be 24 where, friends you used to have, they're starting families, relationships, work is taking them maybe different places. And those people you thought would be in your life forever, it's not that you're, hate them or anything. It's just life takes different roads, as Bob was saying there. And so, man, this one really struck a nice chord with me. I thought it was very powerful, as was the next song, Oxford Town. This was really written about, again, we're in the early 60s in America here. Mississippi was, of course, highly segregated. Whites went to one school, blacks had to go to another, and then whenever they desegregated everything, there was a gentleman who was a student there.
James Meredith at the University of Mississippi, which is 1 mile outside of Oxford.
They had to bring in the military and protection because people didn't want the Mississippi school to be desegregated, which is crazy to think about, but this really didn't happen that long ago, 55 years ago or so.
It's a very short song. It's, less than 2 minutes?
Yeah, a little less than 2 minutes.
But it's very powerful. He never actually mentions the University of Mississippi or Meredith, but that is what this song is about.
Yeah, he notes how this guy's going in with his girl and he has to have a gas mask on because or he's going into a restaurant and they tell him to get out because his face is brown. And yeah, just a lot of high-level, fantastic lyrics that really make you think. It still stand true kind of to this day at certain points.
Definitely.
And then we're going to move on to track 10, Talkin' World War III Blues. This is in the Talkin' Blues style. In this time, you had the paranoia with the Cold War and nuclear stuff, so
anti-communism stuff, and he's able to use that, Trey, that talking blues style to make this a funny song. It takes you on a visual ride if you just close your eyes. I mean, Dylan does this on a lot of his songs, but this one in particular, and it takes you through the fact that there was probably, we think World War III started and there's a bomb that's went off, and he just kind of walks through. He drives himself a Cadillac, perfect car to drive after a war. He pops his head down into a shelter. He needs something to eat, but they threaten him. He goes to a hot dog stand, but the guy runs off because he thinks he's a communist. So just tremendous imagery. I mean, it starts out he's going to the doctor's office telling him he had this dream.
Best part was at the end where he quotes an Abraham Lincoln quote. I'm not sure if it's really an Abraham Lincoln
I'm not
quote,
sure if it is either.
but it's like this really thought-provoking quote, and then he says, Abe Lincoln said that, and then Bob shares his line where, you could share my dream, something along those lines, and he's like, I said that. I thought that was the best part of the entire song, and there's just some great humor and great comedy in here, dealing with a high level, at times terrifying subject for the people living in this time. And again, one of Bob's strengths is to toe that political line to where no matter what side you fall on, he can get you to think.
So it takes us into the first song is not his on this album, Corrina, different musical style because it's not his. We have the drums now, we have a bass in here. This was the first album. Halfway through this album, it finally brought in a backing band. He'd never played with one on record, so they really utilizes them here to a nice extent. It's a song from 1928, and it basically just says, if I can't have you, then nothing else matters.
Yeah, and for the Led Zepp fans out there, there's a line, I have a bird that whistles, I have a bird that sings, and Led Zepp used that line as well, and You Shook Me. I believe that's a Robert Johnson line.
It is. He uses some Robert Johnson lines in this song, so that's probably where Zepp got it from.
And this is the most mellow track
by
on
far.
the entire, just a song that stands out, even though it's not lyrically crazy or anything. It stands out due to the instrumentation, and I dug it. And then we go to another song that's part way with Bob, part way with somebody else.
Honey, just allow me one more chance. It's just what it sounds like. He's asking this girl to give him one more chance.
Yeah, and it's 2 minutes long.
Yeah.
It's again, his voice is kind of the marker here.
I
think he has a unique sound. The way he's able to fluctuate his voice at different points was stood out to me. And then we go into the last track, I Shall Be Free. This is kind of an absurdist, surreal, comedic track. It's an interesting way to end the record, but maybe since there were so many heavy themes, he wanted to leave the listener like just feeling good. And he packs 11 verses in here.
Yeah, 11 verses in 4 minutes and 48 seconds. He just fires out all kinds of nonsensical stuff in a way, and then he'll slip a line in there that's pretty deep.
Yeah, he mentions a bunch of people that were popular kind of in the 60s.
Bridget Bardot, Sophia Loren.
Vocal delivery here is very unique. He's talking about a certain guy who's out there preaching, and then there's another guy eating pizza, he's eating bagels, he's eating chitlins. Just some funny stuff in here, and towards the end he's talking about how he's drunk just to kind of level his head or something along those lines. So then he brings in some sharp one-liners in there. I thought it was a fun way to end the record.
I thought it was too.
But yeah, I guess that'll lead us to our favorite tracks. So for me, it's going to be the major ones: "Blowin' in the Wind," "Don't Think Twice," "It's All Right," "A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall." I also really dug "Masters of War."
And "Girl from the North Country."
Yes, and Bob Dylan's "Dream." I mean, there's...
Oh, and Bob Dylan's "Dream." I'll echo all of those. That's pretty much mine. That brings us to our overall grade. I had never heard this album, and boy, I was not disappointed. I love this album. The more I listen to it, the more I like it. For me, I'm going to be at a 9.0.
I'm going to be right in that same ballpark, man. I'm going to be at a 9.25 on this. It struck me because a lot of these songs, even though they dealt with issues that were in the early 60s, a lot of the themes are still prevalent today in 2019. So
big time.
It's at times a very timeless record. The instrumentation, though at times sparse, is very well produced, and I just really think there's a lot of tracks to go back in that are some of Dylan's best in his entire catalog.
I agree.
And I really enjoyed it. So please let us know in the comments below what you think of the Freewheelin Bob Dylan and how it stacks up to some of his best records. And as always, Dad, appreciate
a lot of fun.
The research. We'll have more Dylan soon. And if you enjoyed what you saw here, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button. And we upload multiple times a week, a variety of genres. And until next time, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see ya.